Hello and welcome everyone. We are Team H from the ALA Emerging Leaders Class of 2020, and we will be giving a brief presentation on our Emerging Leaders project, the Climate Change Library Lab. So our team is made up of 6 members, Lizzie Boden, Victoria Crim, Rhonda Evans, Kayla Kuni, Katherine Dannehl, and me, Jennifer Embree. And our Emerging Leaders project was sponsored by ALA's New Members Roundtable. So now let's jump in to start discussing our project. The NMRT was looking for a group of emerging leaders to create a library weather resiliency clearinghouse. And the main purpose of this clearinghouse was to create a centralized online space where libraries of all kinds could find information about promoting community resiliency in response to climate change and other extreme weather events. So the project description also provided a few descriptions or suggestions for the types of resources that the NMRT project sponsors were hoping would be incorporated, such as preservation and conservation resources, outreach programs, building operations, collections, and more. So working off of this provided project description and several productive discussions with the project's sponsors, our team had several brainstorming sessions about how we wanted to tackle creating this clearinghouse back in the spring of 2020. So out of these discussions, we came up with a name for our website, which is the Climate Change Library Lab. And then each of the team members became responsible for researching, gathering, and creating different resources that would be featured on the website. So Lizzie and Tori focused on interviews, case studies, and staff preparation resources. Rhonda focused on disaster planning and collections, in particular, how to preserve and conserve collections during extreme events. Kayla focused on climate change related programming at a variety of different types of libraries. Katherine focused on financial planning resources and creating infographics for the website. And I focused on creating suggested reading lists and gathering resources on sustainable libraries. And now we'll move on to talking a little bit more about these individual projects in more detail.
So as Jen mentioned, while outlining our vision for this project, we felt that it was also important for us to have a section for case studies to highlight institutions that have experienced the disasters we were going to be exploring. So on the website, you will also find 7 case studies for disasters such as fire, floods and hurricanes, pests, and tornadoes. And each respondent graciously answered our questions, which included how their institution was impacted by the disaster, whether they had an emergency plan in place beforehand, and whether they made changes to it after, and also what they felt their institution handled well before, during, and after the disaster. Now, each case study ends with the last piece of information that the respondent wanted other libraries and museums to know. Each response was very informative, and it was interesting to see the different ways that institutions responded in the face of natural disasters, as well as what they took away from the experience. And we hope that you find these case studies helpful in your own institution's planning and recovery.
As weather disasters tragically become more common, the most important thing any library can do to be ready for a disaster is plan in advance for their staff, communities, and collections. It sounds obvious, but it's easy to put off given the hectic day-to-day pace in many libraries. You know your most likely disaster, so think about it now. Our project website includes 2 major sections focused on planning for your staff and community. One is for everything your library should do before a disaster. Here, you can find practical tips and resources for things like creating a disaster plan, a financial plan, building relationships with your community relief organizations, and where and how to train your staff. We also suggest thinking in advance about what the picture might look like after a disaster for your staff and community. This section of our website has resources and tips on post-disaster informational and emotional needs, communication, financial assistance, and building relationships in advance. We also suggest you think about your most vulnerable populations and what they will need and have a plan to provide it through your own means or through partnerships. And now we'll jump over to discussing your collections.
Climate change can have a devastating impact on collection items, as evidenced by the recent number of libraries and cultural heritage sites destroyed and damaged by fire, flood, and hurricanes. In addition to large-scale damage, one might notice an infestation of never-before-seen pests, small fires caused by an increased use of space heaters, and damp conditions due to an increase in humidity. With proper planning, collection management staff can prevent and successfully salvage materials impacted by the changes in climate. The resources in the Special Collections section of the Climate Change Library Lab can assist in formulating these strategies. preservation resources from institutions such as the Smithsonian, the National Archives, the Library of Congress, and the National Fire Protection Agency can provide guidance in planning and educating staff on collections care, as well as assist with creating a plan of action when it comes to protecting staff and collections if a large or small scale disaster strikes.
From a community engagement standpoint, we wanted to provide visitors with programming ideas. We opted to break these programming ideas into 3 groups: children, teens, and adults. Many of these programs can, of course, be modified to work with multiple age groups. The idea here is to give library staff members ideas as to what kind of programs they could present to the public and integrate in discussion about climate change. We also provide information about organizations that can possibly be considered for partnership opportunities. As we know, programming can be difficult and the topic itself can be controversial. Keeping that in mind, we provide some tips related to hosting a successful program about climate change. We've also provided information and links about initiatives driven by ALA. We have a link to the Sustainability Roundtable and links to information about ALA's Resilient Communities, Libraries Respond to Climate Change pilot program. This program provided 25 public and academic libraries funding to host community programs related to climate change. Our page has several links to showcase what different types of libraries offered through this pilot program.
Welcome to our Climate Change Library Lab website. We have it set up into different sections, which we just went over in this program. Emergency preparedness, we have our case studies listed here. Emergency plans for fire, water, pests, and pandemic care. Planning and responding to disasters, including financial planning, pre-disaster planning, post-disaster considerations. And we have our programming section covering children, teens, adult, and partnership ideas. Our sustainable libraries pages include case studies for designing green libraries and some further resources about green libraries. And we also have some additional resources on environmental justice, climate change, and information literacy. The flexibility of maintaining a clearinghouse in website format ensures that the effects of this project will last for many years to come. We imagine that future library professionals, maybe emerging leaders, NMRT members, or another group, will build upon this resource. COVID hit right as we started this project, so we had to switch up our approach to include some pandemic-specific resources, as well as general disaster-related resources. Our hope is that as climate change continues to affect the world and as new disasters hit, library staff and administrators can come to the website and find everything they need to navigate disasters before and after they happen. Future library leaders, whether they are brand new to the field or seasoned veterans, can help guide libraries out of disaster and into recovery with our Climate Change Library Lab website.